The wind was older than memory that day, and it came screaming across the high desert with a voice made of dust and fury. It howled over the mesas, tore through brittle sagebrush, and swept across the canyons in a storm of red sand that turned the sun to a dim ember behind a wall of haze. There were no birds in the sky, no cattle on the plains, only wind and the ache of something ancient moving across the earth. Otto knelt alone at the top of a ridge, his silhouette still against the storm. Around him the ground was broken shale and bent juniper trees, and before him burned a small fire, ringed by stones blackened with the memory of years of flame. This was not his fire. It had belonged to his mother once, a woman who had whispered to spirits beneath these same skies, who had spoken to wind and bone in a language older than words. Otto did not come here to pray, not anymore, but to keep something alive. The fire, perhaps, or maybe what it remembered. Then he heard it faint. Wrong, not the voice of the wind, but something thinner, sharper, raw, like the thread of a soul coming undone. Otto rose slowly, his eyes narrowing, his ears straining against the scream of the storm. The wind clawed at his coat, lifted his braid, filled the world with dust. But there it was again, that sound. A whimper, human, hurting. He moved down the ridge with boots steady despite the tearing sand, toward the gulch and the dying fence line that marked the remnants of the old trail. The posts had long since collapsed, broken teeth jutting from the earth, but one still stood, and to it someone had tied a girl. She was slumped forward, arms stretched cruelly above her head, wrists bound with leather straps that had bitten deep into skin turned gray from exposure. Her dress, once soft, hung in filthy tatters. Her hair was a matted snarl of dirt and dried blood. Her fingers were bent inward, nails cracked and bloody where she had tried desperately to tear herself free. She could not have been more than 18. Otto paused only long enough to see her chest rise shallow, but present. Then he stepped forward, drawing his obsidian knife from the sheath at his hip. One hand touched her shoulder, the other sliced through the bindings. Her body dropped. He caught her. She weighed almost nothing. Her head lolled against his chest, breath hot with fever. He said nothing, asked nothing. He simply took off his long coat, lined with jaguar hide passed down from his uncle, and wrapped it around her, arms and all, tucking the fur gently against her skin like he was guarding something already fading. And then he turned back into the storm. He carried her across the rocks, down into a hidden path only the wind and his mother had ever known. The world howled around him. Dust clawed at his face, tried to blind him, but he moved like a man who remembered every bend, every step. The girl stirred once, a whimper, then silence. By the time they reached the cave sheltered beneath a stone ledge, half concealed behind a curtain of cedar, the storm had begun to tire. Inside, the air was dry, still. A fire pit waited, bones of old flame resting in the ash. Otto laid the girl gently on a bed of pine needles and rabbit fur, then crouched beside the coals and coaxed them back with flint and breath. Light bloomed small, sure. Heat followed. She moaned and shifted. He removed her ruined shoes, washed the blood from her hands, crushed dried root into a paste and applied it to her wrists with quiet precision. She didn't wake, not fully, but her fingers curled slightly into the warmth. Otto sat beside the fire. He said nothing, asked nothing. Outside, the wind softened. The flames rose slow, and in the hush that followed, the girl began to breathe easier. But her name was not spoken. Not yet. The first thing she felt was warmth, not the kind that comes with safety, but the unexpected heat of waking in a place that was not the place she had left behind. Her body ached deep in the joints, the bruised ribs, the raw burns around her wrists. The memory of the fence still clung to her skin like the smoke of an old fire. Evelyn opened her eyes slowly. She was lying on a bed of fur and dry grass inside a low, earthen shelter. The walls curved, made of hide, cedar, and soot-dark stone. A fire burned a few feet away, small but steady. The air was thick with pine smoke and something sharper. Herbs, perhaps. Outside, the wind had quieted to a whisper, and across the fire sat a man. He moved without sound, hands calm as they poured hot water into a shallow wooden bowl. Steam rose. He added something, leaves, roots, small blue blossoms, and stirred slowly. He didn't look at her, didn't speak. She sat up to fast. Pain bloomed in her side like a slap. He noticed then. "Drink this," he said, pushing the bowl toward her without crossing the fire. His voice was low, calm, like he was speaking to a deer he didn't want to scare away. She didn't reach for it. Her voice cracked like old wood. "Why didn't you take anything?" He paused. Her breath caught. "You had me. I couldn't stop you." He looked at her, not with confusion or insult, but something quieter, something like recognition. "Because nothing was mine to take," he said. The answer settled between them, heavier than silence. She stared at him a long time, waiting for a laugh, a scoff, a shift in tone. None came. He went back to stirring the herbs. With stiff hands, she reached for the bowl. The warmth seeped into her palms, then down her throat, spreading into the cold places inside her. She sipped without tasting. He turned his attention back to the fire, still not asking. Evelyn leaned back slightly, glanced around the shelter. No weapons on the walls, no trophies, no crosses or flags or signs of claim. Only the rhythm of breath, the whisper of wood, the quiet presence of someone who didn't demand anything. "I don't know your name," she said, her voice rasping. He didn't look up. "Ada," she nodded slowly, though it didn't feel familiar. "That means something in my tongue. It means eagle." She looked at him again. He didn't resemble any man she'd ever known. He didn't look down when she spoke, didn't puff his chest, didn't reach to touch. He simply sat present, not pressing. She pulled the hide tighter round her shoulders. He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask what had been done to her. She didn't offer, not yet. Instead, he said softly, "I call you Yaka." She blinked. "What?" "It means the plant that grows after fire," he said. "One that shouldn't come back but does." She let out something between a laugh and a sigh. "Why a plant?" "Because you are growing," he said, "even when no one waters you." She stared at him, uncertain how to carry the weight of words like that. No man had ever spoken to her like she was still alive inside, like she wasn't just bruises or shame or memory. The fire cracked. She looked down at her hands, dried blood beneath the nails, half-healed scabs across her knuckles. Then up again. "Yaka," she repeated. The word tasted like wind. He nodded once. They didn't speak again for a long time. But when she finished the bowl of herbs, and when she lay back down beneath the hide he had given her, her body didn't flinch when his shadow moved past the fire. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, Evelyn closed her eyes, and the dark behind her lids didn't come rushing forward to swallow her whole. Mornings came quietly in Ada's world, not announced by roosters or bells, but by the first blue blush of sky brushing the tops of the cedars, and the subtle shift in wind as it curved through the canyons. Evelyn woke before the sun cleared the ridge, her body still stiff with bruises, but lighter than it had been that first morning in the bed of fur and woven grass. There were no clocks here, no chores marked by hour, no names spoken to claim time. But somehow she came to know the rhythm of things. Ada taught without speaking more often than not. He knelt beside the coals and showed her by touch, by pattern, how to build a fire that breathed without smoke. She learned to lay kindling like a whisper, to feed the flames in a way that made them dance gently, not leap. It wasn't just for warmth. It was for hiding, for surviving. "You never want to give yourself away," he said once, voice barely louder than the fire. She listened, watched, mimicked. Her hands were clumsy at first, but they learned. He showed her which roots to chew for pain, which dried berries to steep for fever. Together they walked the slope beyond the shelter, where the earth was scarred with signs only the quiet noticed: hoofprints at dusk, rabbit tracks by water, the slow belly drag of a snake across dry dust. "Read the ground," he told her. "It speaks." She smiled, skeptical. "I never learned to read anything else." But slowly she saw how a turned leaf could mean a deer had passed, how moss bent the wrong way could mean danger. The land wasn't silent. It only waited for someone willing to listen. Ada carved symbols into flat stones and pressed her fingers to them. Wind, tree, sky, home, not in English, but in a language shaped by breath and meaning. He never forced her to speak it, but let her learn it, the way one gathers feathers or dreams. Each night before the fire was allowed to die, Ada sat beside the altar his mother had built, a circle of ash and stone. Its center burned deep with time. He never prayed aloud, but he lit incense, cedar bark, dried petals, and laid them with care. Then he bowed his head. Evelyn never interrupted. She didn't believe in gods, not anymore. But she believed in that silence, the way it made the air inside the shelter shift, the way it slowed her breathing, the way at his hands moved not with command but with memory. And slowly, without effort, she began to sit near when he lit that flame, not close, not asking, just near enough to feel its peace. Then came the fever. She woke in the night, skin burning, mouth parched, vision smeared with shifting shadows. Her body felt torn apart, dragged through thorns. The fire was dying. She could not call out. She didn't need to. He came. He knelt beside her without speaking, hand cool on her burning forehead. He lifted her gently, gave her water in careful sips, pressed warm cloths to her neck. She drifted between pain and the quiet gravity of his presence. When the fever broke near dawn, she woke to something resting at her collarbone, a thin leather cord, worn, dark, strung through with a small carved bone. She touched it, confused. "What is this?" Ada stirred the fire beside her, his voice low, for protection. She stared at the charm, at him. She had been given things before meals, a cot, a name scribbled on a wall, but always with expectation, always with a price. Even kindness had come with claws. Asterisk, but this. She closed her hand around the necklace, and tears came, not the hot, burning kind she had known, not the furious, bitter weeping of anger and survival. No, these came slow and silent, like rain after too many years of drought. They softened the edges of her pain. "You didn't have to," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the crackle of the fire. "I know," he said simply. She said nothing more, and he didn't press her. That night, for the first time since she was a child, Evelyn fell asleep with something resting on her chest that didn't weigh her down but protected her, just as he said it would. And because of that, she dreamed of a fire that never smoked and a voice that never once asked for her name. The wind always spoke louder on the ridge. Ada hadn't said a word that morning. He rose before the first breath of light reached the edge of the shelter and wrapped himself in his long coat, the same one he had once wrapped around her. He gave her a glance, steady and unreadable, then motioned for her to follow. No explanation, no words, only that simple gesture. A nod toward the trail that snaked upward from the canyon and into the exposed spine of the hills. Evelyn followed him. Her legs, once too weak to stand without shaking, had grown stronger in the weeks since he found her. The scars still ached when the nights turned cold, but her body was no longer broken. Her hair, once a tangled mess of blood and dirt, was longer now, not clean exactly, but no longer matted. She wore a tunic Ada had given her, stitched from deerskin, softened by use, the seams hand-sewn with thread made from sinew. Round her neck hung the leather cord, the bone charm pressed sometimes to her skin by her own fingers, often without her realizing she was touching it. The climb was slow. Wind clawed at their faces. Dust rose in spirals between the rocks, catching in the folds of her clothes and hair. But when they reached the summit, the world opened before them. The sky felt impossibly close, like it might be brushed by an outstretched hand. Far below, the river bent like a ribbon of light against the earth. Pines stood dark and still in the distance, but up here the wind moved everything, hair, breath, memory. Evelyn turned to speak, but Ada raised his hand, not to silence her, but to listen. "Sit," he said. She did. Ada knelt beside her and pulled a leather pouch from his belt. From it, he scattered fine gray ash across a flat rock between them. The wind tried to take it, but he shielded the center with his hand. Then, slowly and with deliberate care, he began to draw. His fingertip moved through the soot, carving shapes with the reverence of a man writing prayers. A large circle came first, then another, smaller, inside it. For curved lines arched outward from the center. A spiral followed. And then, in the very middle, he wrote one word. Yaka. She stared at it. "That's me." He nodded once. "It is." Now, the wind swept across the ridge, loud and layered, howling through the crevices like a ghosted chorus. The symbols trembled but did not disappear. Ada turned toward her, his eyes unreadable. Do you know what this means? She shook her head. It is not just your name. It is your mark on this land. A story burned into ash. She studied the spirals. Why here? Because wind remembers. He stood then, opened both arms wide to the air, letting it hit him fully across the chest. His coat flapped like a winged thing behind him. Give it to the wind, he said. She furrowed her brow. Give what? What you're still carrying. Evelyn hesitated. The breeze tore strands of hair across her face, stung her eyes, dried. Her lips, her hands clenched in her lap. What if I can't? She whispered. Ada looked at her, his face carved in light that was slowly turning gold. Try. She stood, unsteady at first, then taller. She looked down at the word etched in ash yaka and felt it settle into her bones. The wind howled, pulled at her sleeves, loud, demanding, and she opened her mouth. I was 15, she said, her voice cracking like a dry limb. My uncle owed money. He sold me to a place with red curtains and locked doors. They called it a dancing house. The wind cried out, as if furious. I ran away 3 times. Once, I made it to the river. But they found me. They always found me. She looked up into the wind. It rushed her face, like it wanted to carry the story away. This time, they tied me up and left me there. Said I was a warning. Her throat moved as if she were swallowing stones. I thought I'd die there. But you didn't. Ada said gently no. She whispered. You found me. The wind eased, just slightly. Evelyn stepped forward and knelt beside the symbols drawn in ash. Her fingers brushed her name. Will I ever forget where I came from? She asked. Ada crouched beside her. No, he said. But it won't define where you go. Her breath hitched. Then he reached once more into his coat and pulled out a small loop of river stones, polished smooth by time, cool and worn by years of water. He placed them carefully in her palm. This, he said, is the only name you need now. She curled her fingers around it. Ada stood, turned back toward the trail, and walked. He didn't wait. Evelyn remained there, kneeling beside the fading symbols as the wind picked up. The ash lifted, carried skyward. Her name scattered into the clouds. And this time she let it go. The nights were always the worst. Not the darkness that no longer frightened her. It was the silence that came with it. The kind that pressed too close. The kind that reminded her of locked rooms, wooden doors, men with soft voices and rough hands. The kind that held breath like a blade. Evelyn didn't sleep much. Most nights, she lay under the hide blanket Ada had given her, listening to the wind scrape against the stone, to the last pop and hiss of dying fire. Other nights, she woke in a sweat, gasping, fists clenched around the memory of something that wouldn't leave. She never screamed, never cried out loud, only once. She murmured something in her sleep low, panicked, barely more than breath. And when she woke, Ada was there, sitting by the fire, sharpening his knife. He didn't speak of it. She didn't either. But that changed the night of the first frost. The wind had stilled, but the cold had crept in through the seams of the shelter like it belonged there. Evelyn lay curled beneath the blanket, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Her body ached, but not in the old way. It was tired, deeply tired. Her mind spun like wolves circling the edge of firelight, too close to rest. But that night, something inside her gave way. Her breath slowed, her hands loosened. And somewhere between thought and silence she slept. No dreams, no ropes, no boots. In hallways, no locked doors. Just breath, just warmth. When she woke, the fire still burned low. Steady, orange light lit the walls of the shelter, and beside it sat Ada. He had not moved. His back was straight, legs crossed, eyes half-flitted as if he were watching memories in the flames. She sat up slowly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. You stayed all night? She asked, her voice rough with sleep. He looked at her and nodded once. You stayed through the storm? She said again. I stay through the night. She blinked, her throat thick with something she didn't know how to name. Her chest tightened not with fear, but with the ache of being known. She looked at her hands, then at him. Why? Ada tilted his head just slightly. Because you needed someone too. She let out a breath. It shivered on the way out. I've never had that. He didn't answer. But his gaze never left her. She shifted forward, knees brushing the edge of the furs between them. The fire cracked. A curl of ash rose into the air, swirling. Neither of them reached. Neither spoke. But her hand moved. Just a little, just enough, that her fingers grazed the back of his. Ada didn't pull away. He didn't curl his hand around hers either. They simply stayed like that, touching. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a promise. But it was something. She looked at him. I didn't dream, she whispered. His voice was soft. Then you're waking up. And that night, when Evelyn lay down again and pulled the blanket around her shoulders, she felt his presence nearby, and for the first time in years, her breath came easy. She closed her eyes, and the dark held no teeth. The air felt strange that morning, still and heavy, like the land was holding its breath. Ada had risen before dawn to check the traps deeper in the canyons, leaving Evelyn behind to tend the fire and prepare herbs for tea. The sky above the shelter was cloudless, but the wind carried something new, something off. The scent of strangers, of men who did not belong to the land they walked. By mid-morning, the first hoof beats cracked the silence. Not one rider, not two, many, fast, clumsy, loud. The kind of loud Comanche riders never were. Evelyn stepped outside, her heart pounding, her hands tightened in the folds of her tunic. She knew that sound. She had heard it before through barred windows, past red curtains and thick walls. Ada returned just as the dust rose at the trail's edge. He saw her face, saw the fear there before she could speak, and in an instant, he moved in front of her, still as stone, shielding her from sight. The men who rode up wore stiff coats, badges dulled by time. They weren't federal, not soldiers. Worse, private hunters, hired hands of brothel owners, men who fed on girls with no names left. One dismounted. His boots sent dust curling. We're looking for a girl, he said casually. Name's Evelyn Dorsey, 18. Took off from registered property 3 months back. His eyes flicked toward the shadow behind Ada, to the narrow figure half hidden by the lodge. You seen anyone fitting that description? Ada said nothing. He just stared. The man laughed. You Comanche boys always this quiet. Evelyn stepped forward, not fast, not afraid, but with a grace she hadn't known she possessed. She stood beside Ada, not behind him, and lifted her chin. Her hair was braided in the old way, tied with a strip of deerskin she'd cut herself. Her eyes were calm, not cold, just still. My name is Yaka, she said, her voice as clear as river ice. I'm not who you paid for. The man's face curled. You don't get to decide that. She didn't flinch. I just did. He glanced at the others behind him. They shifted in their saddles, uncertain now. You got papers? He barked. No, she answered. But neither do you. And you don't have my face on anything that'll hold up in court. You don't even know who I am. Another man spat. Looks like a match to me. She doesn't match anything anymore, Ada said, voice low and gravel deep. She belongs to this land now. The tension snapped taut. Hands hovered near guns. Dust swirled. Time hung. Evelyn stepped forward again, her shoulders trembling, but she didn't break. You can't drag me back into a name I didn't choose. The man stared at her, jaw locked, fingers twitching once. But the moment passed. There was too little proof, too many eyes, and too much silence from the hills behind them, as if the land itself might rise if they made a wrong move. Let's go, the man muttered, turning away. She ain't worth the noise. One by one, the riders turned and vanished like smoke on wind. Evelyn stood still, only her breath giving her away. Then, as the last of the dust settled, her lungs opened, and she exhaled. Ada stepped beside her. She didn't look at him when she spoke. I should have left, she whispered. You could have been hurt. His answer came low and steady. You're not a weight I carry. You are the reason I still walk. She turned then, eyes wide, full of something too deep and vast for words. For a long time, neither of them said anything, but her hands found his, and neither of them let go. They built it slowly, whatever it was, with hands that no longer trembled, and silences that no longer ached. The shelter wasn't large, just a one-room cabin made from pine logs and weathered planks. nestled against the shoulders of ancient boulders where the wind moved through crevices like breath. Across a reed flute, smoke curled upward from a small chimney set above the hearth, and out back, a lean-to kept the firewood dry. The roof sagged just slightly in the center, and Evelyn loved it for that, like even the house had learned how to bend without breaking. The forest crowded close around them, protective and unafraid. The pines stretched tall, defiant toward the sky. Wildflowers bloomed in bold, reckless clusters, and the air shifted with the scent of pine, ash, and something older still, something that had lived there long before either of them arrived. Otta always rose early, before the birds called to the morning. He carved arrow shafts in long, patient strokes, chipped flint until the edges were sharp as ice, tanned hides over coals that burned slow and steady. He moved with the calm of someone who never needed to be seen to belong. Evelyn moved differently. Now, she laughed at least sometimes. She spoke more, too, especially to the children, who wandered from the main encampment to sit cross-legged in the grass. Outside her little home, wide-eyed and full of endless questions, she taught them letters first, in English, sounding out each shape with patience. Then when they asked, in Comanche too, she wrote the alphabet in charcoal on river stones worn smooth by time, and showed them how to trace their names with small, eager fingers. Letters are like bones, she told them once, smiling. They hold stories upright. Sometimes Noma would come and sit quietly beside her while the children practiced. The old woman never corrected her pronunciation, only nodded when she got it right and smiled with a depth that made Evelyn feel like her breath had weight again. The cabin became more than shelter. It became rhythm. It became language. It became home. One night, late in summer, long after the fire had gone to embers, Evelyn stood alone beneath a star-heavy sky. The moon had not yet risen, and above the dark edge of the trees, the stars hung so close they looked like they might fall. The wind moved gently, brushing through the leaves like fingers combing through the hair of a sleeping child. She stood at the edge of the clearing, arms wrapped loosely round herself, listening to everything and nothing. Otta stepped out behind her, barefoot, his movements quiet as ash falling from a dying log. She didn't turn. Her voice was soft. "This is the first place I didn't feel owned." He didn't answer right away. The wind moved again, cooler this time, brushing her face, tugging at the hem of her tunic. Then, gently, he said, "Because this land owns no one. It just holds them." Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her. The silence that followed wasn't the kind that waited for permission to break. It was the kind that gave space to breathe. She reached down, picked up a smooth stone from the grass, and traced a letter into the dirt with its edge. Then another, then the rest. Yaka, her name, not the one she'd been born with, not the one she had been sold under, but the one she had earned. The one the wind had whispered and taught her to carry. Otta stepped beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his presence. "You know what that means now," he said. She nodded, eyes still on the dirt. "It means I lived." Behind them, their home stood like a quiet promise, stitched from wood and ash. In front of them, the forest stretched wide and wild, like a secret too vast to end. And in the space between breath and silence, Evelyn understood a truth she'd never spoken aloud. She had not been rescued. She had been named, and in that naming she had begun again. The day of her naming arrived with wind that moved not like weather, but like memory. It spun through the trees with purpose, a current of something sacred that tugged at loose braids and drifting thoughts. The sky was a pale blue dome, stretched wide with possibility, endless and unjudging. At the edge of the forest clearing, where grass grew long and warm stones caught the sun, the tribe gathered. They had only done this a few times, and living memory called the wind to witness, spoken truth into the air so it would never be forgotten. Evelyn stood in the center of a circle of stones. Her tunic was dyed with sage and bark. Her hair was braided in the Comanche way, bone beads woven into the ends. Around her neck hung the old leather cord she had once worn at the brothel, now stripped of charm, carrying only memory, only its own story. Nakoma approached her, slow but sure-footed despite her age. Her shawl danced in the breeze. Her hands were lined like dry riverbeds, but when they touched Evelyn's shoulders, they were strong and warm. The wind quieted. "You are Yaka," Nakoma said, her voice low but powerful, echoing as though it belonged to more than one lifetime. "You are wind-rooted. You are no one's daughter. You are the child of storms." The words didn't float away, they sank into the air like stones settling into river silt. Absorbed by the land itself, Evelyn's throat tightened. She turned toward the small fire burning behind her, steady and even, just the way Ada always built it. She knelt, drew the old necklace from the pouch at her side, the leather frayed, the charm darkened by time and everything it had endured. She stared at it for a long moment, then she laid it gently in the heart of the flame. Smoke rose. She did not cry. Not yet. "I'm not erasing who I was," she said, her voice steady. "I'm burying her, so Yaka can grow." The fire cracked in approval. Behind her, someone stirred. She looked up. Ada stood at the edge of the circle. His hands were at his sides, his face unreadable as always, but his eyes, dark as thunder clouds, held her as if she were something sacred. Evelyn rose to her feet and walked toward him, slowly. One step, then another, until the fire glowed between them. "You never kissed me," she said. Her voice caught, not with accusation, but with quiet truth. Ada looked at her a long time. Then he said, simply, "I kissed the fire each night to keep you warm. That was all. And it was everything." She stepped around the flame and reached for his hand, not to claim him, not to possess, but to share weight. He took her hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of something earned. He led her then, their steps turning toward the hill that overlooked the valley. The wind moved with them, like a dance to ancient, to remember its steps. When they reached the top, Ada knelt and began preparing a fire the way his mother once had, kindling tucked under dry moss. Hands moving with reverence, flint struck, sparks caught, flame came alive. Evelyn sat beside him, watching, leaning into the curve of his shoulder. He didn't move away. "This land has many names," she said after a while. "But today," he replied, "it only needs one." "What name is that?" she asked. He looked at her, then placed his hand over the center of her chest, where her heartbeat pulsed strong and certain. "Yaka." The wind curled around them, lifting in a spiral, not fierce, not loud, but certain. It carried a whisper. Through the tall grass, lifted ash from the fire into the sky, brushed Evelyn's braid over her shoulder like a hand smoothing hair from a beloved's face. She closed her eyes, and in that wind, in that breath, she felt it, not forgiveness, not forgetting, but something better, belonging. And so, with fire between their hands and wind in their hair, they sat as night climbed slowly behind the trees. No promises spoken, no future drawn, only the truth of now, and the name she had chosen, the name no one could steal. If this story stirred something in your heart, the wind of a name remembered, the fire of a home found in silence, then you are one of us. At Wild West Love Stories, we believe the greatest love stories were never bound in pages, but lived in dust, in shadow, beneath wide sky and silent trees. If you want more tales of souls who found each other beyond the world's edge, subscribe to the channel, like, and share this story with someone who still believes in healing love. Because out here, in the West, the wind still remembers. And so do we.